First of all, I want to thank Tom so much the invitation to be here in this so important day for NOVA. My name is Raquel Varela. I'm a specialist on history, on social history, and particularly on global labor history. Our group, our research group, and our Observatory for Living and Working Conditions, we are mainly focused on labor, although for us, labor, we see it as a centrality and as a totality. So half of our researchers are not historians, they are sociologists, they are anthropologists, they are physicians. We have several physicians from NOVA and from other hospitals working with us. We have specialists on law. We have specialists on social service. So it's a group that from the beginning is focused on interdisciplinarity. Our group is focused mainly on four aims of the ONU United Nations agenda, which is education, health, labor conditions, and inequalities. I will focus here on the question of social inequality, which is nowadays one of the main subjects. And it is one of the main subjects because in the last 100 years, we are living the moment where inequality is bigger than ever. So poverty was bigger 100 years ago, but inequality is bigger now. Poverty is one of the sources of inequality, but there are other sources of inequality I shall debate here with you and raise some hypotheses where we can have a role as a university, a role as scientists, both to understand it and both, of course, to help to change it in, of course, a better way. So Portugal particularly is among 20 countries on the OCDE, the most unequal country. And as you know, today in a world scale, 26 persons, 26, have the same amount of income as 3.8 billion persons. So it's more than half of the population. That's why the question of poverty and the question of inequality are today key questions. I also shall say that inequality, equality is not the same as lack of differences. It's very important to say this because we believe as scientists that when we have more equality, we have more capacity to be different. So that's why the concept, philosophically and historically, the concept of equality has to merge, has to be, not to merge, but to be side by side with the concept of liberty. In primitive societies, was very common that someone that couldn't hunt because he was hurt was, at the beginning, was put it in a very privileged way. Instead of being abandoned because he could not feed himself and he could not hunt for the other parts of the community, he would be put it as a proto-physician, a proto-intellectual, as a shaman at the beginning. So we, the primitive societies, look to the most fragile parts of their community and use it as one of the strongest parts. The person that could not hunt, but had time to learn and had time to teach. This is one example of how we can deal with inequality in order to respect and even use the differences in favor of communities, which is for us very important. This little story I told you also helps us to understand that social inequality is not the same as natural inequality. It's more difficult to lead with natural inequalities, but even the primitive societies had wonderful ideas to do it. How can we not do it today, it's of course a question we should also ask ourselves. What we can do as scientists in a highly complex, urban, developed societies as we are nowadays? Well, first of all, we can help to understand the reality with using critical reason, using objective analysis of the society. This is much more difficult than it looks like. That's why we have so many debates. And that's why politicians so frequently use figures in an improper way. I should give you an example I brought today for our small but very important, I hope, for the NOVA presentation. We have a world debate on demography in our societies. The idea is that societies in Western countries, in core countries, are getting old. As they are getting old, we don't have enough babies, enough children, and we have a problem of sustainability of social security. This is not, for example, our approach. Our approach is based on labor relations and productivity of labor. This means that my grandmother, she was she was not a poor peasant, but she was a peasant. And as all the peasants in Portugal in the 60s, she used to not have machines because the intensification of production in agriculture is in the 60s, of course. Nowadays, nobody works with this. Of course, we work with the very developed machines, and we are not even speaking of the new and already ongoing so-called revolution of 4.0, automation, etc. So the productivity in Portugal has raised something like 500% in the last 40 years. So our question as scientists should be, if we had social security systems they were designing in the 70s as universal social security systems after the 25th of April revolution, and they were sustainable, how they are not sustainable now with 500% more productivity. Of course, that our hypothesis is that we have a real problem of labor relations and a problem of qualification and a problem of education. That's why also we have specialists on education in our group. If someone is going to the labor market earning 500 euros and someone has left the labor market earning 2,000 euros, of course, social security is not sustainable. But this has nothing to do with the great news that we have a big life expectancy, which sometimes in the media is given as a tragedy. Oh, people are living longer. Look what problem we have in our hands. This has to do with the problem of labor relations. But it's very simple to say we have a problem of labor relations. We have to go deeper to understand what is these labor relations. That's why we try to do. For example, if we look to Portugal, we have more or less 5 million people in labor market as active population, but almost 2 million have just the basic education. This is a huge problem connected also with inequality. Why? Because we know that the first figure I gave you comparing Portugal with 20 countries on OECD-related inequalities, what we know is that in Portugal there is a direct relation between inequality and poverty, and between poverty and unemployment. Why? Because the real figures of unemployment, which is, we can use, of course, the regular figures that are officially taken for as a measure. It's a methodology. I'm not saying nobody is lying. What I'm saying is that the methodology that is used by International Labour Organization uses the idea that someone unemployed is someone who has been looking actively for a job. If someone stops looking actively for a job in a certain number of weeks, immediately is considered out of the statistics. This means that if we put together, that's something we do in our group together with statistics and our colleagues from the Instituto Superior Técnico in Mathematics, if we put together the number of people that are that are, they don't have anymore the courage to look for a job because they are depressed, because they have given up. If we put together the people that are working in jobs not compatible with their high qualifications, if we put together people in part-time or under unemployment, usually the real statistic of unemployment in Portugal goes immediately to the double. At this moment, although we are in the middle of a pandemic, which is an exceptional situation, but an exceptional situation that brought to the eyes of the public a social situation that was already there. I should underline this. We had already a huge problem of qualifications. We had already a huge problem of access to the National Health Service, because before the pandemic, Portugal was already one of the countries that used more the money of the families to have access to health care. We had already a problem in the organizations of the school, of schools, and a problem of the labor force is getting old in the public services, namely. So all these things that now appear in a very catastrophic way because we were put it in a very exceptional way were there before. I probably almost ending my time, which I ask sorry for this. So when we want to look to the question of inequality, we want to raise questions that can give us, as far as we can, a more realistic and total picture of the question of inequality. So we start on labor market. We want to understand who is employed and who is not. We want to understand the income. The income is very important to understand equalities and inequalities, not just because you have access to health care or to a better education or not. But for example, the income is one of the explanations of the sustainability of the welfare state. In a country as Portugal, but also in Europe, welfare state plays a key role on the question of poverty and on the question of social inequalities. So for you to have an idea, in Portugal officially, and the measure of statistics of poverty is very low. So in our opinion, there are more people poor than what statistics shows. I cannot develop this now. But in official statistics, Portugal has 47% of people poor, according to United Nations figure. After the social transferences of social assistance, this number goes to 18%, from 47 to 18%. This means that the welfare state is absolutely essential to understand the Portuguese society. There is no such thing. So, for example, when we look to the level of wages, the official minimum wage is around 600 euros, but the real minimum wage to survive in Porto or Lisbon is around 1,000 euros. You cannot understand these wages without understanding that there is a huge number of programs of social assistance that are able to compensate these very low wages. This is another thing we analyze. Another important thing we analyze now in the pandemic, unfortunately, became very clear, and we have one researcher and a doctor specialist, a physician specialist on diabetes. Portugal has 1.5 million people with diabetes, and diabetes are highly connected with food, and food is highly connected with income. So, for example, the level of obesity, it's related with the pandemic because several studies have been connected the people that are seriously ill with COVID and obesity. Of course, I'm not speaking of conclusion data, just on hypotheses, but there is a relation in several countries. It was put it as an hypothesis. In any case, what we know is the level of absenteeism, of problems, of something absolutely common in Portugal. We have more or less the same life expectancy as other countries in Europe, as Denmark, 85 to 87 years in Denmark. I'm not sure it's 2 years or something like that different. But the life expectancy with health in Portugal is 15 years less. In order you be put it in life expectancy with health methodology, you need to be incapable. This means that most of the workers in Portugal have to go to pre-retirement systems before they end or before they go to retirement, because they are either physically or mental or with mental problems connected with poverty. Just to end my my approach to the question of obesity, we know that the obesity in low-income families raises to 40%. And this is a world figure. Portugal, unfortunately, is also on these figures, but this is, unfortunately, a situation of Western countries that we analyze as well. So I wanted to finish this short presentation to say that our challenge is to understand in a very critical way what, not just the means, but the ends, which means for what end. So we have to ask ourselves which kind of society do we want to live, and then we have to look to figures without with all objectivity as possible, and then we have to propose hypotheses that can really help to change this, because inequality is a kind of a mother of all other inequalities, intellectual inequalities, urban inequalities, health inequalities, education. So if we look to this point, we can really help society in a better way, and I hope our university, and I'm sure we'll have a role on this. Thank you very much.